Let's get started. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that I am, although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for entertainment or educational purposes only. If y'all have a concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. Very excited for today's interview. So we're going to be talking with Charlie from ChariismaonCommand. So he is a gigantic YouTuber who has an amazing channel where he focuses on communication skills. So I don't know if y'all have seen ChariismaonCommand, but it's amazing. So he does such a in-depth analysis of various social interactions, and I think is incredibly needed in today's world, where I think that like there's sort of this global social skills atrophy. So we're going to be talking to him a little bit about his perspective on men's mental health, dating, and a couple of other topics. So yeah, we're super excited for that. So just a reminder that Mental Health Awareness Month is May. And so we're doing a lot of really cool stuff here at HG. Stay tuned to our various channels. We'll be streaming across different platforms, uploading stuff in various places. We've got YouTube videos coming out. I'm still on the struggle bus in terms of my of some aspects of my personal health, but hey, that's okay. So a couple of other things. So we're trying to pick the things that we think are going to be the most impactful to y'all. So we did a deep dive into understanding trauma, which I think we got a lot of positive feedback on. So y'all are free to check that out. Last Friday, we did a deep dive into addiction. So how can you understand addiction as a process the addictive personality. We didn't go into a whole lot of details around particular substances, but just what do you as a human being need to know about addiction? So that stream was last Friday. And then I think we're streaming this Wednesday as well. So stay tuned. So we've got a lot of great content kind of coming out for y'all. And we'll even have something from the community that hopefully y'all will enjoy that'll be coming out later this month. So stay tuned to all that. The last thing that we're going to be doing during May is traveling a lot. So I think our Modern Wisdom, we were a guest on the Modern Wisdom podcast, which just went live. We were on Steak and Eggs recently, so we're traveling around. This weekend, we're going to be at the American Psychiatric Association doing some stuff there, so stay tuned to that. So we'll be traveling around to different places and trying to help people wherever they are. So, thank you to everyone who's been a part of this community so far. Y'all are the reason that we are where we are. We really hope that we've been able to be helpful to you, and that's really what we're focused on. Just a couple of quick updates, for those of y'all that are interested in more in-depth education, like beyond, let's say, a 20-minute YouTube video, check out Dr. K's guide. That's where a lot of our, I would say, like kind of timeless information or perspectives is stored there. So if y'all are looking for a comprehensive approach to depression, and that sort of includes clinical stuff, but also like spiritually, like how to find purpose in life, how to deal with things like existential problems, that's all in the guide to depression. There's a guide into anxiety, which teaches us a lot about just how our mind functions. Our guide to ADHD and doing stuff, which is about ADHD, but also like doing stuff. So what I tried to do there is figure out, okay, like everything that I've learned about the mind from 7 years of training to become a monk, plus becoming a psychiatrist, how can we kind of reduce that to information about like how to understand behavior and how to like get stuff done. And then of course we have our meditation guide for those of y'all that are interested in in-depth perspectives on meditation. I think the ADHD and the meditation guide are the most popular. And so if y'all are interested in more than what we can provide, let's say in one stream or one video, that's to be found in the guide. We also have a lot of really cool community events going on this month. So Kruti, our CEO, did an event last week on entrepreneurship. We've got a lot of other, social sandbox and these other kinds of things going on Discord. So check all that stuff out. It's all free. And the last thing is from a coaching standpoint, our coaching program is pretty full now. And it's been full for about 40 days. But if y'all are still interested, feel free to sign up, and we have new spots opening up every day. So people are getting off the wait list on a daily basis. And so, check that out if y'all want to. We'll be presenting at APA once again. This is the second year in a row based on some of the outcomes from our coaching program. So cool. Let's hop in with Charlie. Okay. Charlie, you ready? Alrighty. Let's...
Hello, hello.
Hello. I do not see your cam. Oh, wait, maybe it's me. Hold on. I don't see your camera. That's the only thing. But we can move. There we go.
All right.
Hey, man.
How are you?
I'm doing great, dude. How are you?
Excellent. Hold on, let me put you on. I have a big screen in front of me. Let me blow this up.
Awesome.
All right. Now it's like real life.
Yeah, dude. What's going on, man?
Not too much. I'm very excited. A little bit nervous. I have not done live streams in the past, so this is a new thing for me.
Yeah, well, I think it's just a conversation. I think people are oftentimes a little bit nervous at the beginning, but I think as we get into it, I'm sure it'll be a good conversation.
Yeah.
Can you just start off by telling us a little bit about, because I don't know that everyone knows who you are. I'm pretty sure most people are familiar with your content, but can you tell us just a little bit about what kind of content you make and what kind of you find interesting about it?
Yeah. So the most recent thing is I'm actually not very involved with Charisma on Command, but what I started with that you're definitely referring to, which I'm known for on YouTube, is Charisma on Command. And that is a YouTube channel that was birthed from my own shyness at the time. I was very introverted and felt that I missed the memo on how to comfortably interact with other people. And so approached it in kind of an analytical way and then shared that on the internet. So what that looks like, if you might have seen our videos or heard my voice, is I take some of the most popular people out there, a lot of the Marvel actors, sometimes singers or athletes or that sort of thing, and talk about what it is that they're doing in their interviews and other videos where people seem to find them, fascinating, confident, connected, all those sorts of things.
Yeah. So it started. Sorry, let me just fix one thing real quick.
Sure.
I'm trying to. Oh. Sorry about this. There's one technical difficulty.
No sweat.
That we are trying to fix live, and I'm going to try again. Sorry about that. Okay. GG. So one of the things that we are, give me just 1 second.
All good. I've this is why I don't live stream, but I've been in this position before, so I totally understand.
Okay. Almost done. Okay, done. I think. Okay, good enough. Sorry about that. So it sounded like you started with Charisma on Command to kind of conquer your shyness, and then so what are you up to now?
So I'm in between right now. Trying to find the aligned next project, and I've started with the podcast, which is how we got in touch. Reached out to you to have a conversation. Also, have worked on the side on a Dungeons and Dragons show, which is literally right over here. Yeah, total hard left turn, but is very much in line with where I came from. Was the more reserved, nerdy, bookish guy. And so we filmed 2 seasons now, one of which we're in the midst of releasing to a small audience. Which is us in costume and accents playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Wow, dude. And are you a player in this D&D show, or are you like DM or what? Okay.
Yes, I'm a player, though I think actually what I'd like to do is learn to DM. I love the collaborative storytelling, and setting up a playground for my friends to participate in is just a very gratifying experience. So I've done a handful of just off-camera DM things that I've had a great time doing.
That's awesome, man. How long have you been playing D&D?
About 1.5 years. I think we picked it up around pandemic time. We were trying to find something to do that was new and different, and I could be done inside without, all of the in-person interaction. And that was where we found Dungeons and Dragons. And it was a shame that it took me so long, because it was around when I was a kid. But I think, I don't know, it was either too nerdy or had the reputation of being too nerdy that I never gave it a chance. But when I found it, it connected in a huge way.
Absolutely, man. So I played D&D kind of growing up. I was also a nerdy kid.
Yeah.
And super shy and really enjoyed it. And it's interesting, even now, I realize part of what I loved about becoming a psychiatrist was that I really like stories. Like, I think that's the one thing that I really enjoy about life. So I used to read a lot, even in terms of like gaming and stuff. Like, I liked stories. I liked the cooperative storytelling aspect of D&D.
Yeah.
And even with my kids now, when we do like bedtime and stories and stuff, well, it'll be like a little bit cooperative where they get to make choices about what they do.
I love that.
And so it's a lot of fun. And what I really love about being a psychiatrist is like hearing people's stories, and like oftentimes they are far more riveting than most of what you see in fictional portrayals. It's just really interesting.
Have you played it all as an adult, or has that fallen off since you were a child?
So I've played 8 times in the last 2 years. I would say we try heroically, but as my friends and I have gotten older and had kids and things like that, it becomes harder to meet up, but we try.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's the hardest thing, is to get that weekly game going for a bunch of adults that have different things. But that honestly is the hardest part of getting a stream, is to find 5 people that can commit to weekly gaming.
Yeah. That's cool, man. So that's awesome. That's a really big pivot. I'm really curious about, you want to tell us a little bit about how you decided to do that, or what was going on?
Sure. I was feeling burnt out of Charisma on Command for a number of reasons. One of which is that I didn't know this about myself at the time, but when I feel most alignment is when I am what is fun for the audience and educational for the audience aligns with something that I am learning. I really enjoy going from 0 to 1 but I don't enjoy doing the sequel. So if I was a director, I would like making the first Avengers, but not necessarily the second and the third Avengers. I like figuring things out for the first time. And I felt that I'd gotten to a place with Charisma on Command where I was applying the same analytical filter to just new people every week. And that was losing, I was losing connection with the thing that got me there in the first place as the business grew. And so for a number of reasons, one, self-reflection, but I've also had the good fortune to do some therapy in the past and have things like breath work, meditation. I've done psychedelics. And those opportunities for deeper inner reflection connected me to the place that Charisma on Command was born from, which was that curiosity, that love of being on the edge and in the present moment. And Charisma on Command had gotten to a point where I was doing it from memory. I was doing it not from this place of like cutting edge present exploration, but from, I know how to do this. This is old hat. And so for that reason, I needed to find either a new angle on the company or something entirely new. And I decided to just make that hard left turn.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So can you tell us a little bit about, I'm curious, have you had any experience with Ayurveda? Or you even know what that is?
You know, it's so funny. My friend just brought this up. He told me that I was a Vata Pitta.
Yep, you are absolutely a Vata Pitta.
And so a previous iteration of me would have been very skeptical of these different kinds of modalities, especially ones that were older traditions of, what do they know? But I find myself sincerely curious, and I just learned that, and I'm trying to find the more traditional wisdom, all of those sorts of things I'm trying to incorporate. So I would love to learn more about it and how you might apply that to, me or anything.
You have what I would describe as a very classic Vata Pitta problem of, your best work is in exploration and rote stuff becomes very, very boring. I'm also a Vata Pitta. And so I sort of have noticed the same thing about myself, that like doing the same thing over and over and over again gets boring, and that I do my best work when there's some amount of difference or innovation. And I understand that. So we reached out to you because we wanted to talk a little bit about men's health, potentially like shyness and dating, or is that, I mean, but it's not, we don't have to focus on those things.
So that I can do that. Again, that's all in me. Where I find that I'm most interested is the newer mental health exploration, but there is a cross section between those two that I think is we can probably find the things that led me towards the more outward looking men's health, dating, can I make women like me, and how that has evolved over the course of my life to how do I feel about myself and why was I looking outside for some of the reflective validation.
That sounds perfect, dude. Can you just tell us about that journey?
Absolutely. So was very shy growing up. And that wasn't a problem for me because I had my core group of friends until I hit puberty and I wanted girls to like me. And that became a pain point. And I also think I didn't know it at the time, but that was there's a weighing mechanism, or can feel like you're judged by your male peers sometimes by if you can get girls to like you. And that became sort of, in some ways, an indicator of masculinity, even from that adolescent age. And so I didn't know it at the time. I think I had both sincere, authentic desire to connect with women, but also what does this reflect about me? And I became very curious and interested in how can I be more outgoing? Can I be the leader of this group of people? What can I do to get this girl to want to go on a first or second date with me? And so that took me into the whole era of my 20s, which was really extroverted, outwardly focused, where my mantra was, don't be yourself, choose yourself. And the wisdom that was present there was, I have these old habits. They are not reflective of who I am deep down because I'm just being shy all the time. And I'd like to choose a more outgoing, engaged personality so that I can connect with people. Didn't know it at the time, but I was also probably far too willing to, not far too willing, it was appropriate for that age, but for right now, I was trying on a bunch of different personalities, and I didn't necessarily have the discernment at the time to know, oh, this one is core to who I am, and this one is a bit of a performance. And so my 20s were amazing. I traveled the world. I lived in multiple different countries, learned different languages, practiced jujitsu, traveled with a group of my friends that were really tight, and built the business of Charisma on Command. And then towards the end of my 20s was in a relationship that ended, and I was in heartache. And I had suspected that having achieved everything I want, the million subscribers on YouTube, doing well financially, had a great group of friends and a girl that I liked, but I was probably sadder than I'd ever been before after this breakup. And that started a period of the last 5, 6 years, which has been, okay, I'm not going to go to the world to try to meet every single need. I'm not going to say, hey, I feel lonely, let me go hang out with a person. Or, hey, I feel like I'm lacking in status, let me see if I can, enter into this group. Where are those holes inside of me? And so the last 5 or 6 years has been a recapitulation and a deeper understanding of who I am, why I behaved in some of the ways that I behave, which were not necessarily bad, but I think were motivated by a sense of lack and scarcity, and trying to find a deeper inner peace, connectedness with myself, from which I can then go out into the world and like, oh, there is a sincere extrovert in me, but it's not this forced extroversion that I felt I had to do in order to be liked or outgoing or those sorts of things. So that's the broad overview of where I've been. And within that, there's, a million sub stories that we can dive into any one of.
Yeah, dude, what an amazing journey, man. So it sounds very developmentally appropriate is the term that I would use, right? So like shyness and then sort of focus on the extroversion and then sort of being performative and then recognizing like, hey, I'm trying to fill internal holes with external things.
Yeah. Yes.
And then and then therapy, psychedelic spirituality, and meditation for this phase. Right?
Totally. I'm glad that you said that, because I can sometimes mistakenly say I was doing it wrong back then, or I shouldn't have done that. And really, when I'm actually aware, it's like that was perfect for the phase of my life that it was. I needed that experience. I could not have leapt from shy to grounded in myself. I needed to go out into the world, find that, which of the needs can I meet by interacting with other people, and which of them have to be met from inside of myself. So I'm really happy that I have that phase. I don't discourage people from doing the types of things and the exploration that I did, but just for me right now, I'm so much more interested in the inner world than, what to say to get the girl to like you or any of that kind of stuff. And I'm happy that I have those videos cataloged, because if somebody asked me that question, I could say, hey, I talked about that a couple of years ago, and this is where you can sort of find that answer.
Yeah. So I wonder, can I follow up on one or two things?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned that, part of this journey of discovery has been sort of figuring out what's a part of your core personality and what feels a little bit more like performance. How do you tell the difference?
Oh, well, I never had this mechanism before. At first, it felt like everything is closed. You try them on, you do it. Like I don't know that I had a connection with who I really was. And even the shyness that I experienced as a kid was a bit of a cover for who, for what felt like me. These days, I find myself from a felt energetic sense of connection with my gut and my heart. And it's when I'm aware, for instance, of my butt against this couch and my belly and the breath in my belly, the words that come out are honest. They are authentic to who I am. But when I can get into like this sometimes agitated, sometimes nervous, sometimes excited state, I could come up into my head, and now I'm just saying things that sort of make sense, but lack the, you could call it alignment or integrity of connection with deeper parts of myself. And so that's like that noticing has been incredibly powerful for me. And I had no mechanism of doing that when I was younger. And so when people would say, just be yourself, I was like, oh man, what lazy advice that is totally inactionable and totally wrong. But I see the deep wisdom in that, though it is, potentially very hard to apply.
Yeah. So speaking of actionable stuff, I mean, can you tell us a little bit about how you went from shy to being extroverted and kind of traveling and building Charisma on Command? What was that journey like?
That was so. I, again, didn't know it at the time, but it was did it with a bunch of close friends, and there was wonderful pieces of that, but there was also elements of codependency. So there was a lot of like healthy pushing one another, but we formed a web of needing one another in a way that I think grew past healthiness. But that was necessary at that time in my life. So we had a group of guys, and the mantra was, if something scares you but is not dangerous, you have to do it. And so there was this whole like, I want to go talk to that girl, or I'm at a networking event and I admire that speaker, but I don't want to, go up and tell them that I read their book and I appreciated it. And that mantra served us incredibly well. It opened up tons of opportunities. The rush that you get, no matter how it goes with that person, is so affirming and makes you feel like Superman. You're like, oh my gosh, the world is is so much more full of possibilities than I felt it was before. So we had a couple of rules about how we would engage with the world. And then afterwards, we would discuss what went well, what didn't go well, where did I get screwed up. And so we took that sort of mentality out into our lives. Eventually, I read The 4-Hour Workweek, and within that, it was talking about finding where your passion meets a market need. And the passion that I had was in understanding how I could transform myself to be better liked by men, women alike. And so that was where Charisma on Command started. Within that, it had the idea of forming a muse business so that you could travel the world and trying to retire early in life rather than saving that traveling, taking the middle of the day off, doing nothing on a Wednesday for 65. We said, okay, what if we could do this at 23? And I think at 24, I moved to Brazil. We lived in Brazil, Las Vegas, Vancouver, Medellin, Colombia, traveled around and did all of this stuff with a group of friends in those different places. And so every day was Tim Ferriss style optimized. We had all of our little sub goals that we would hit, social, related to health and what we were eating, if we were working a little bit on the business, and then having fun. And we would grade ourselves at the end of each day. So we were hyper optimized. It was a ton of fun. And I'll pause there if there's anything within that is of interest.
Yeah. So Charlie, I'm trying to think about what. So can you tell me a little bit about how you found this group of people? Like, what were those conversations like? Where did these people come from?
Yes. So one of them was my best friend from 10th grade. And so we talked to each other. And it was a lot of sharing the mentors and books that we had. So the 4-Hour Workweek was one of them. The book that made me realize I could talk to girls was The Game. And I was like, oh my God, you can go out and you can use pickup lines and girls will like you. Fortunately, we adjusted that approach fairly early in art, but that was eye-opening to me that you could get a different reaction based on different things that you said. And then within that, my friend and I started going on internet forums, and we offered a $5 class on the things that we were learning via Skillshare. And so 10 people showed up. One of those people dropped out of college and came with us. At another class we went to, that guy dropped out of his thing and came with us. So we had a real aura around us at the time. We had a sense of infinite possibility. You don't have to do the 9 to 5. You don't have to be constrained. And that attracted people pretty powerfully. We were also fairly evangelical about it. we couldn't shut up about it. And that was a mistake that I think we made, was rather than having the security and groundedness enough in our decision to leave our job and go abroad, there was a codependent desire to persuade everyone that this was the best way to live their life as well. And so I definitely, there was good things that came of that, which is we convinced, I think, 9 people to quit their jobs and move to Brazil, but it might not have been the best choice for every single one of those people.
I'm super amazed by your insight. Yeah. I was noticing an internal judgment of, generally speaking, when we're evangelical, it's the person we are trying to convince the most is ourselves.
Yes.
And I'm just so I've never heard of anyone doing this kind of thing, because it sounds like you guys are like you're like a crew that is going about and trying to extract the most out of life.
Yes, we were the gringos. We were the gringos in every country that we went to, this roving band of guys. We were, I think, all solid human beings and tried to spread good, positive vibes wherever we went. But it was a really special time, and I look back on it very, very fondly.
And so what do you think what do you think y'all were looking for?
I'll speak to myself, because I have seen not everybody. Some of us has come around to a similar place that I have, which is I see the healthy young man exploration of the world in there. I also see the drive of, I'm not enough. Let me layer all of these accomplishments on top of this core of lack in order to feel enough. And then I can be confident, and then I can have the things that I want, and then I will feel excellent. So for me, what I was looking for at the time, I mean, some of it was like, I wanted a way to live my, like, I think what I'd seen in my parents' generation and my dad in particular was someone who sacrificed professional satisfaction in order to provide for his family. And that I don't think was, I wish that he'd had another option or found another option. But when I thought of that, I was like, that seems soul sucking. It seemed soul sucking for him. And I didn't want that for myself. So one of the things that I wanted was to create from my heart and to love what I did for work, to love the thing that generated money. And that was part of it. And then I know I was also looking for validation from other people. Mm-hmm. I wanted people to like me. And I was looking to become someone who I thought was worthy of a tremendous amount of validation. But within that, there was also a bunch of healthy exploration and travel, and we learned languages. And so there was you could, the shadow was mixed in with the light in terms of what motivated me at that point in my life.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you're kind of touching on a particular behavior. We tend to think about things as healthy or unhealthy, mm-hmm. But what I'm really appreciating about the way you're describing things is that it's like neither or both, mm-hmm. Right? There's healthy exploration, and then there's also essentially gratification of the ego, mm-hmm. Which stems from things like insecurity. And yes. That too is developmentally appropriate for someone in their 20s.
Yeah, totally. So finding the forgiveness to say the type of nuanced thing that I said and that you reflected back to me, which is, yeah, it was totally appropriate for the time frame. And one of the things that has been frustrating is because I was so energized at that point in my life, and I had a winter session, I would say, in my early 30s where I needed to like stop going out as much, slow the travel down, shrink my circle and myself. And oftentimes I ask myself, can't we just go back to that crazy, fun, exploratory period? That was so fun. And I've realized that was perfect for that time, but it's no longer appropriate, and I'm no longer capable of having entering twice into that same river, if you will, to use the old parable.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you've mentioned this term codependency a couple of times. What do you mean by that?
So for me, what I mean is, I think that we're an interdependent species. We need one another in important ways. When I think of a healthy dependency, I think of authenticity and clarity in communicating your needs to someone else. I think of taking ownership appropriately of, for instance, if I'm feeling anxious and I'm seeking a compliment from you, I might do all sorts of backdoor ways of getting it from you. That can be blown out at length in a relationship and becomes codependent, because now I am not being direct and I'm getting my needs that are appropriately met by me from you. So that's what I think of when I think of codependency, is both a combination of indirectness, inauthenticity, and an unwillingness to meet certain needs. So what we wound up with, I think, in some of the friendships, were lopsided relationships where the weaknesses in one person would never get addressed because the other party would always hold that particular thing. And so one of my things was, I am very uncomfortable, I'm changing this. I had been very uncomfortable in saying when I felt my boundaries crossed, when I felt that my needs had not been taken into account, and in having a calm, perhaps a bit angry conversation. But for me, that was either I didn't feel it at all, never brought it up, never said anything, or it built up so much that I was so angry about it and had held resentment for so long. And there was not this appropriate level of, you are crossing boundaries, this needs to change or stop, or, and this is the thing that I've never done, I never broke up with any girlfriends, I need to step back from this relationship. So that has been a process for me as well as going, I'll pontificate for a moment here, but
Please,
I conceived of love as the primary piece being closeness. the most important part of loving someone was that you maintained a very close relationship. You saw each other often, you talked all the time. And what can get sacrificed for me is either if someone's needs aren't being met, myself, themselves, something else. And then what happens is, for me, I stop accepting them the way they are. And I start coming up with strategies or things that I can do to transform or change them so that my needs are met. As opposed to saying, the most important piece of love is acceptance. I can see where you are in your life and I can communicate to you, but if you're unwilling to meet a need, what is appropriate is with love to separate to a farther thing. Maybe we don't hang out every day. Maybe we see each other once a week. And I've had to, and what I've noticed is that if you could, then you can maintain the love. The love can sustain throughout that and not develop into resentment. But I built up many relationships because I was so unwilling to step away from so many relationships that resentment, pain, and just, a lack of alignment built up in several areas of my life that I needed to adjust.
Are you comfortable with me asking you a couple more questions about that whole scenario? Because I think it's incredibly insightful and could be very illustrative.
Yeah. I want to be careful to protect the identity of some people, but I would love to talk about this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So
yeah,
I applaud your boundary setting there. It makes my job a lot easier. So I want to really more talk, not so much about a particular person, but just your relationship with those things, if that feels comfortable.
Yeah.
And just let me know if I overstep or something. There's 1,000 other things I can ask you, okay?
Sure.
So you laid out this scenario, and let me just see if I heard you correctly, that, so love meant closeness. So those two things were almost synonymous. And so something about accepting someone, and so that was one piece. And then the second piece that I kind of heard you mention was that if you had an unmet need, not any unmet need, but maybe some need that is related to the relationship in some way, and if that person was not able to meet that need, was not willing to meet that need, didn't understand that you wanted them to meet that need, then you would engage in behaviors to try to sort of squeeze it out of them. And I apologize if I'm kind of putting you in a bad light. I think it's really common for people to do that. I do it in my relationships. And so over time, what you really discovered is that, okay, like if you're expecting this person to meet your need and they're not meeting that need and you're not able to articulate that, that can over time lead to some resentment.
Yes.
And I'm also hearing or reading between the lines here that you had to come to some realization in order to distance yourself. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about, does that sound accurate so far, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that feels right.
So what I'm really curious about is what made it hard for you to distance yourself? What did it mean to you to stay so close?
One of the things, energetically, is I think, I didn't know this about myself, but I think I'm fairly empathic, meaning like I can, when someone else gets upset, I feel that in my system. And I think this one I can share is that there was probably a fair degree of enmeshment between me and my mom when I was young. And I felt her anxiety often. She's a fairly anxious person. And to mitigate that, I made adjustments in myself. So I'm sorry I've sort of lost your question, but this does feel like the root of what you said.
You haven't lost my question.
Okay. So we'll come back to exactly what you said, but I'll establish this as sort of the ground that I've uncovered, is that I could confuse my feelings and my needs with someone else's very easily, very, very easily. And I can give examples from this. One, a small one was, remember wrestling as a kid, and my mom in the audience going, very, very frightened for me. And my experience of it was I was one of the youngest kids, and I came in second place. That was like awesome. And her experience was fear and panic. But for me, what that totaled up to is I quit wrestling. I felt the stress of causing that panic in her made me not want to do that thing. And so one of the behaviors that grew out of that is I learned never, not just with her, I do not struggle publicly. It, like when somebody sees me struggling, that old it triggers this old thing in me, this old discomfort of I am burdening them in a way that is very uncomfortable for me to experience. And so, just in re-understanding, I used to tell people, oh, building the business was nothing, so easy. I never did any homework. I never studied. And going back and be like, oh my God, I paid such close attention in class. Yes, I never studied, but I would put my head down and fake sleeping so that people wouldn't think I was working hard. I mean, there were these like adaptive behaviors. So just to give an example, and then catch me back up. So I'm coming back to your question now.
I love where you're going. Just keep,
okay.
Do you have more to say? Or
I mean, I could go ad nauseum about this, but what I have learned is that there is a way to discern what my feelings are and what other people's feelings are. That was a trial and still is for me to really sort through. And I think it affects everything. It's a hallmark of now my relationship with my girlfriend, I think started from a place of the familiar, I have total control. Everything that everyone feels is because of me. That's a very familiar, comfortable, powerful, safe place for me to be. For her, she was happy to play the role of, a lot of what I feel is because Charlie did something or didn't do something. And we've had to, within the last year and a half, really take a look at the places that for me make me feel powerless, which is your feelings. Like there are things existing in you, my girlfriend or you, any person in my life that I did not cause, that I cannot fix, that I cannot mend or make better. And my job is to sit with my own discomfort with that. And your job is to tend to your needs, tell me when there's something that I can do directly that could help meet a need in you, and own when that thing isn't working for you and there's something else that you need to find in yourself. And so that process has been just playing out in so many areas of my life. I'm a codependent Velcro thing. Like I find ways to hook into other people, and it is often in a way of support, help, advice. And what I have not been capable of doing that I am learning to do is sit, hold space, listen, allow people their struggle without interfering in it when it is not asked for.
Wow. So quick question. Love everything you're saying.
Yeah.
Are you okay not answering my question directly?
Sorry. So take me back to the question. Exactly.
No, forget about the question for a second, if that's okay.
Well, it's okay. I can't remember the question.
How do you feel if you don't answer the question?
How do I feel? Like I've let you down. Like you wanted something from me and I didn't I didn't give it to you.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're not responsible for my feelings, right? That's exactly what you're learning. And it's so beautifully illustrated. Because here you are, you're like, oh, like, what was your question again? Like, bro, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, pure authenticity, I love everything that you're saying.
Okay.
The question is, from my perspective, the question is just to hear more of what you have to share. I'm not looking for anything. Is that
the first time someone said that to me, I went, right. I rolled my eyes, and I appreciate that. That is something that that is so hard for me to allow to sink in. I'm not looking for anything when it is authentic and I believe you. That hits my nervous system. Like I want to let it in, but oh God, I'm afraid to.
Yeah.
And it's, gosh, I'm so excited to continue learning to receive that, because what a relief that would be.
Yeah. I mean, so if I can share something else about that.
Please. Yeah.
So to put it simply, Charlie, the reason I'm not interested in you necessarily answering, like if you do, great, is because I think what you have to share is the most valuable thing. The value that I'm hearing when I just listen to you speak is not in a particular answer. Like I'm looking for this bit of information and you gave me that information or you didn't give me that information. Honestly, my authentic feeling of this conversation is just hearing you talk, like whatever you want to talk about. Like, I don't care. It's just your representation of your experience, the way that you're describing things. I mean, the way that, seriously, it's like, I mean, you might as, I don't know if you've ever formally studied psychology, but your fluidity with the concepts is amazing. And part of what I actually really appreciate about what you're saying is that your fluidity with the concepts is very experiential. And so I think that if you have two psychiatrists, for example, talking about, and maybe you're a psychiatrist and I just don't know, but talking about something like enmeshment or codependency, it's going to be so clinical because in psychiatry, our perspective is from the outside looking in. So we like describe behaviors as opposed to describing the subjective experience. So I love talking to you because I think the way that you describe things will actually resonate more with the average person than two experts talking about it.
Got it. Yeah.
Because what is like this example about wrestling, right? Where I'm noticing that you feel really, and even the reason I kind of poked you there and let me know if I crossed a boundary, is that I'm noticing that, wow, this guy is like real. It's really important to him to answer my question. And even though he's sharing something really valuable, he kind of keeps coming back to it. And so I think that's a good example of, you know, the wrestling story and even in terms of your relationship, like, you know, just how tricky it is, especially in a relationship, because if you look at relationships to a certain degree, we're responsible for our partner's feelings, right? Like it's our job to help them feel better. And that's what especially a romantic relationship is about. And at the same time, we can cross the realm into toxicity so quickly if we become solely responsible. And the other tricky thing that I oftentimes see in these kind of codependent relationships is that as you start taking more of that space, your partner starts taking less. And then eventually the burden of their feelings falls to you and you feel wholly responsible for their feelings.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you don't have 100% power. And then that leads to a whole host of challenges in terms of you trying harder, being more controlling, you know, as well as them sort of dumping the responsibility on you. And both y'all agree that if they feel a particular way, it's your fault, which is really when relationships become very difficult.
Yeah. Yes. That all hits.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember what my original question was, but I mean,
I'll just say what you reflected to me. I appreciate it. You help put me a bit at ease, and you are right that I want people to get what they ask of me, and I worry that they don't. And your indication is a really powerful way of saying that. I think increasingly the right people for me will want me. You know, they will want me, and not that I'm never going to have a tantrum or a fit or a problem, but that the thing that they will generally come back to is your presence, the you-ness of it all is the value. And there are times in which I might ask for a particular favor, and I guess I would like that thing, but generally this relationship is built on you, me connecting.
Yeah, beautifully said, man. Yeah. So, can I keep asking questions?
Please.
Yeah. So you talked about people want the you-ness of you. How does one figure out what the you-ness of you is?
I mean, I'll tell you subjectively. For me, psychedelics were incredibly helpful. Did it in a safe space with a facilitator and all those things. Gosh, I mean, I'll take you there. When I was little, I was molested. And one of the things that did with me was it created a profound sense of confusion in me of who I was. Secondarily to that, which was also challenging, and I didn't know any of this at the time. My perspective on the time was this happened, it didn't bother me, it was totally okay. Some people are bothered by that, but I'm just one of the lucky ones that did not get affected by that. And that was true for 20 plus years. I was aware vaguely that this has happened. And as I've revisited in psychedelics, one of the things that happened on one of the nights was I was freaking out, having a very hard time. And in my belly was like, tell this guy that was taking care of me at the time, tell him you're gay, tell him you're gay, tell him you're gay. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. No, that's not. And it came up. I said, I'm gay. And then it didn't taste right, didn't feel right in my throat. And what came out after was I just burst into tears and said I was molested. And what I have found in me is that there are often these blocks, these things that I am afraid that represent confusion of what if this were true. And for me, it was, growing up in the 90s, gay was the thing that you said to someone to insult them. It was the wrong thing to be. And my era, I think a lot of people at some level hold, well, I won't say what other people held, but what I held was totally okay for other people to be gay, but this is not okay for you. And so the fear of things that could be true about me, I think stopped me from exploring what was really there. And so that's just one example. The inability to truly go, am I, do I, that curious exploration was off limits. And so the deeper thing, which was behind that, was this experience happened to me. I have convinced myself that I liked it in order to cope with it. And what was deep in there, after more journeys, was how painful this experience was. How, I thought, fast forward, I eventually, through this, convinced my family and my parents to join me in like an MDMA journey, and in that, uncovered. This was fucking hard. With my dad, I was able to share with him the devastation of that experience for me, something that I was so ashamed to share, and particularly how hard it separated me from him. And I felt I couldn't go to him anymore, was what I felt. I felt crushed and just like soul crushed. I was the way that it felt. And just the shame and which was heaped on in other ways in this relationship with this person dictated a lot of my personality for a long time, the avoidance of things that made me feel shame. And so the meanness of me oftentimes has come through acknowledging and experiencing and feeling pain, because it is my pain. And these are the things. So I realized probably what has happened is things that are me, I separate from, and I create stories that are more comfortable. So rather than being the me that is in pain, that had this experience happen, I'll be this other guy who is totally fine, totally cool, totally happy. And I built up a whole set of habits over the course of my life of being something else, to the degree that I forgot what it felt like to check who I was inside. And I was so used to different mental images of myself that became me that I lost contact with the meanness. So for me, it's been a process of, in many cases, uncovering very difficult emotions, shame, pain, self-loathing, all of these other things, feeling them as fully as I can. And in that, I touch deeper into who I am. And a lot of that confusion is resolved authentically, rather than resolving that confusion with a statement of I'm straight, or like any sort of dictate that I might put out into the world. I just feel who I am much more clearly these days.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. I don't mean to say what happened.
I understand.
But just what I honestly, what it ended with was I was just how you felt who you are instead of defining who you are with words. And I think we see that so much right now, where people will talk about I am a this, or I'm a leader, or I'm an alpha, or whatever, right? Instead of like being one. And I've kind of noticed I really love a lot of your insights, Charlie, just about how it's almost a little bit mutually exclusive. I don't think that's precisely true, but that the more we talk about who we are, the more we define our identity by words, I think we sometimes get away from ourselves, and we'll strive to be particular things. But and I'm also hearing a very honestly great journey of trying to define yourself in a particular way, learning a lot about positivity and growth, and learning a lot about, okay, if you do set your intention in a particular direction, that you can actually make progress. I hear that your 20s were sort of like a period of empowerment, really. Sort of like a disenfranchisement early on, followed by empowerment, and then now you're kind of into this acceptance phase. where
Mm-hmm.
it's not about power or lack of power, but whatever you are is what you are. And that's hopefully enough.
Yes, yes. I think the 20s, and they were wonderful, but there was a bypass going on in my 20s. It's like, can I just teleport to confidence? Can I speak the confidence into myself? Can I speak the inner okayness into myself via achievement, affirmation, all of those sorts of
Mm-hmm.
things, as opposed to the path that I've taken now is I am going to sit with and move through the exact opposite of what I want to feel, which is self-loathing or shame or confusion. And rather than resolve any of those things, I will allow those things to be resolved by being with them. And the profundity of being with is something that I am just beginning to understand and learn. I was always a doer, a fixer, a changer. If you like, I'm great with advice. I've got a YouTube channel full of it. But what I didn't have in my internal system in my life, and I didn't see the value of, was being with people, being with myself in experiences that were just uncomfortable. I just tried to change whatever I could to bring back that state of comfort as quick as possible. And I see the immaturity in that now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've never heard the word immaturity used to describe that, but it
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, the avoidance of pain is frequently what gets us into the most trouble. I know one thing I've sort of noticed as a psychiatrist is that people tend to avoid pain, first of all, which makes perfect sense. But honestly, I've seen just as many lives ruined by positive emotions and being being out of control with your positive emotions.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about mania. I'm talking about falling in love with someone. I'm talking about, you know, really love has destroyed just as many lives that I've seen that, you know, hate has, which sounds really bizarre to say, but I've kind of seen it in terms of what people will tolerate because they love someone, what people will inflict on someone because they love someone. And it's sort of like this possessive sort of love. And also who the other people that you are willing to hurt if you are in love with a particular person.
Yeah. Yeah. My sense, and totally, I use the word in the same ways, is that again, I feel like that for me is obsession. You know, what I'm learning is that there is, the way that I'm trying to experience, not trying, am genuinely experiencing love. It's tough to hurt someone from the love that I am increasingly feeling versus the love that I did feel, which is what you described, was possessive, obsessive. And it was actually very much about what this relationship fills in me, which is why I will go to these lengths to deceive or get what I want or, you know, hurt someone else or do any of those sorts of things in it. And yes, it felt like an intoxicating experience, but only because I was not aware of the deeper wound that this was acting as a salve for.
Yeah, I would say that what I'm sort of hearing there is it can really be summarized with this phrase. I don't know if you're familiar with like attachment and detachment from kind of Eastern philosophy, but this is what's kind of confusing is in the West, we tend to think about emotions as like positive or negative. In a clinical perspective, I think we have a slightly better understanding that, you know, there is no such thing as a positive or negative emotion. Emotions are just emotions. But generally speaking, I think what the yogis kind of figured out is that it is not an emotion that is good or bad. It is our relationship to the emotion which determines whether it's helpful or harmful. So there are two Sanskrit words, rag and dvesh. Rag is attraction, dvesh is repulsion. And essentially, if we are attached to love, then it becomes obsessive. And similarly, if we are repulsed from shame, then that becomes harmful.
Yeah.
So it's when we're kind of tranquil with each one, where we allow them to be, that we actually form the healthiest relationship with our emotions, which is that they're just emotions.
Beautiful. I love that. I find myself increasingly called towards Eastern philosophy, Eastern traditional medicine, and those sorts of things. I've found, again, I feel like I really have done the Western thing, and I've gotten a lot of value from the Western thing. The main thrust that I have seen, to me, when I think of the West, I think of sort of Viktor Frankl. I think of finding meaning in pain, which to me is making this moment refer to something else. Like rather than sinking into the moment, let's find something larger, something bigger that we can connect this moment to confer something onto this moment. And the Eastern thing seems to be, can I stop referring this moment to something else and be in this moment? Can I have presence for what is and not need to necessarily connect it to make it mean anything? It can just be. And I don't know if that's how you experience it, but for me, go ahead.
I would say there's so I think that is both correct and there is something on the other side.
Tell me about that.
So let me start by asking you just one more question, then I'm happy to explain.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say, okay, so what's your understanding of what the goal of the Eastern perspective is?
So, and again, the East, calling anything the Eastern perspective, I recognize is to collapse a ton of stuff. Yeah. But when I feel it, it feels like presence would be the one word. It would be entering into the now, and seeing the beauty of what is without needing to change, alter, or shape it. And there's also the Tao, the going with the flow, allowing yourself to become one with the everything, broadly. So that's my broad understanding.
Yeah. So I think well said. And I'm not, I understand some Eastern concepts, but I'm not objectively, the knower of truth by any means. But what I would say is that, being in the now is actually the first step. And I really love the way, man, Charlie, I just love the way you talk, dude. So I love the way that you're talking about pain as a referential thing, right? So what we're going to do is we've got this experience, and instead of sitting with the experience, we're going to derive something out of it, right? We're going to distill it into something that's valuable. So we're going to take a negative and we're going to transform it into a positive. The problem with that is that there is a fundamental judgment that the negative is worse than the positive. And so we're still moving away from one thing and moving towards another thing.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of good research around why that's healthy. So if you look at post-traumatic, like the research on post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic stress disorder, what we sort of know is that as people go through these terrible experiences, like genocidal experiences, that there are two camps of people. And some people will develop psychiatric illnesses and some people will sort of become stronger. And then that can be the same group of people. Eventually, people will kind of go down the route of post-traumatic growth. And a key, just sort of like scientifically important part of that is the development of meaning or narrative around your experience.
Yeah.
So Viktor Frankl, I'm kind of with you, but I think the really interesting thing is that maybe you'll get there one day, or maybe you'll arrive somewhere else.
I hope so. Let me know.
Is that I think that there is a being in the now. Almost, you'll eventually see that there is this transcendental purpose as opposed to a referential purpose. I don't know how else to describe it. But even being in the now is part of, even if you talk about the Tao or the flow, that there is a continuum of stuff. And that is really what like that purpose is. It's not purpose in the microcosm. It's like purpose at the macrocosm. And I even think when I've worked with people with trauma, really there's sort of the referential purpose, but there's also like a transcendent purpose that people can get to, which is like recognizing that too was part of my path, almost in the same way that you are. And to recognize that what we're talking about with purpose is that like in life, I am what I am. The now is the now. And then this is the progression of my life. And that's okay. And what I'm supposed to do on this planet, on this earth, in this life is to just go down the path that I was meant to go down. And this is where some of these broader concepts like karma, which I think are very poorly understood, like, I think these really start to come in and being in the now is great, but it's interesting because I think that duality is actually dissolved the further down you go.
I like it. Yeah, I'm definitely not there, but I had peak experience of that? Let me see. I've had moments where it feels that where I've been able to be with the now and look back and go, oh, I feel the connectedness of all of this. I feel the beauty of this path that appeared to have gotten off course because this thing wasn't supposed to happen, and it was so wrong, and it shouldn't have been that way, and it should have been different. And now, without forcing it, I think one of the things that again is healthy for a phase, but that I'm trying to ease off of, is to take some of these profound ideas, like everything happens for a reason, and repeat it as an empty affirmation to oneself that is not sinking in a deep level. But I've been able to recently to sink into that, the depth of that to deeper and deeper degrees, and with authentically sinking into it. And I see what you're talking about, how, yes, it's not just this point, it is this flow, this river, this larger thing. Yeah.
So I think when we talk about these concepts like Tao or Dharma, karma, that I think it's all like the same thing. And there's this weird sort of transcendental kind of thing. It's also interesting because I would encourage you to examine whether, so we're talking about it, I'm talking about it as if it's on the other side of where you are right now, right? Because you're working on being present and stuff like that. But I would even, the more I'm hearing you speak, I wonder if actually you've gotten a glimpse of that. And interestingly enough, the more that you realize that there's transcendental purpose, the easier it becomes to be in the now.
Yeah.
Because if this is all a part of my life, I don't need to do anything except for be here, now, and present. And that is sufficient. And it's almost quite liberating if you get a glimpse of that, to recognize, like, you know, this is just what I'm supposed to be. And so I don't need to be anything else. And then it becomes easy to be in the present.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. This is actually something very this last week, these couple days that I've struggled with. The old me felt on my path when I was working in my Tim Ferriss optimized way with my 4 things achieved every day. Like that made me feel on the path. And I sense a larger path that is asking me to let go of a lot of those things and to have more space, less rigidity to how I, just for this phase in my life, not forever, and to let something larger percolate and bubble up. And the glimpses that I have had that move me, and I feel it. There's a knowing that is semi-obscured in me that I both long for and fear of the gift of my life, the way that it is headed, what it has been, and the depth of beauty that will become, and all of those things. And what I can get stuck in is fear that I didn't do what I needed to do today to make that happen. And so I appreciate what you've said, and I'm working with, like, when you have the glimpse of the larger transcendental, it's like, no, it's all working out inevitably perfectly as it needs to be. It makes these days where I don't have a podcast, or I haven't produced a video, or I haven't done something, it lets me understand that they contribute just as much as those days where I am totally productive and make the thing happen in the way that I, was used to doing.
Do they though? Are they just as productive?
What I feel for me, and again, I think that there's different stages. I think that there's some people that really need to, they need to get on their grind, and they need to, like, that's where they are. For me, what I do that I'm not even totally aware of with space and silence is probably even more productive than what I do with activity and contribution in the traditional ways that I'm used to it.
Can I push and or play with you a little bit?
Please push.
So, Charlie, when you say, okay, that's equally productive, right? I'm trying to figure out how to say this. What do you think is better? For everything to be equally productive, or for something to be less productive and that be okay?
I hear you. Perhaps productive is not the right word. That they are, because I agree that it is, if we take productivity to mean What is this adding to your ability to influence, to your power base, to your ability to impact other people's lives in a direct manner, to your ability to earn money or whatever, to the money that you have at your bank. I still think that there is a tremendous degree of productivity to space that I have underestimated. Like a lot of my videos, I write from space. Is where they come from.
I'm not disagreeing that there's value to that.
Yeah.
The reason I'm pushing you is because I think there's still there is a value. You're valuing productivity, even in a non-traditional way, over non-productivity.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So I think this is where I want to say I've worked, and I don't mean to. Please let me know if I come across as like condescending or superior to you in any way. But
no, I appreciate it.
I've worked with I've learned a lot from you. I've worked with a lot of people who are very successful. And I've noticed this thing that they kind of fall into, which is like, okay, like now you've seen the value of space, right? But at the end of the day, are you okay taking space if there is no value? Right? Because if we're really talking about acceptance, you should have no dvesh or repulsion towards wasting your time.
Yeah.
And
yes.
And there's something incredibly liberating, which maybe you've already experienced, which is like, you don't need to be productive all the time. It doesn't have to have productivity in a different dimension. I completely support the journey that you're on. But
I appreciate this. No, I think that you are keyed into something that is not fully germinated in me, which is I'm working through this constant need to produce, give, prove my worth, etc. And I'm finding intermediate steps of, oh, well, this counts as productivity. This counts if I...
So you've got to be careful because you'll hijack the Eastern stuff.
Yeah.
And what you'll do is the productivity mind will be like, oh, like if I become an enlightened, transcendent individual, imagine how much more productive I will be.
Yeah, I can do more.
Right. So it's going to be tricky because I think the challenge that you face is going to be hard, man. And
yes,
and I'm excited for your journey. I have complete confidence in you. And I think it's going to be hard to be less.
It's going to be absolutely brutal. No, it's 100%. Yes, these are, you can call them coping mechanisms to maintain the core of my old belief system whilst rearranging some of the furniture. The good news is it seems that life in its infinite wisdom is insistent that I learn this at a deeper level because it's not, I really am so well taken care of. This has actually been part of my journey, is to really recognize and receive, which is hard, the gifts of my life that are like, I have the gift of having enough money to take a break. I have the gift of a supportive group of people around me who care to see me really find acceptance without pushing, prodding, or cajoling. And to like, a lack of deservingness can be activated that I think runs deep. That, well, how come not everybody else gets this? And how come just me? And it can feel unright. And like, I'm not allowed to enter into that space until I donate enough, give enough, contribute enough, which I don't think that there's an end to that.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. I'm very excited for you, and I didn't mean to poke you too much. I mean, I don't
appreciate.
I'm
good.
I think it's you're gonna love it on the other side when you sort of, you'll realize one day that I hope, and maybe you'll come to a different realization, and the realization I have is incorrect. I don't think so though, because I think I'm already seeing the seeds, but just like you said, you've got to be careful because that. Now I know the productivity of space and the value of space. That's actually falling into your old trap.
Which is value. Yeah. Which is what does this thing have value? Does this have value? Does this have value?
Yeah.
Yes. Versus is this thing?
Exactly. Right?
Yeah.
And so it's seriously something that I think the hardest thing that sometimes I'll try to help people learn, I don't know that you can really teach it, is that, so there's this kind of aspect where everyone's like trying to see the silver lining, right? We're going to practice gratitude and we're going to like be positive and all this kind of stuff. But I think honestly, sometimes the most tranquil thing someone can learn is to actually dispense with all that stuff and to say, okay, this actually isn't as productive. There isn't a W here. There's no way to pull a W. And it's okay to take the L. I mean, once you're okay taking L's, I think there's another layer of kind of peace that comes with it.
But totally. I mean, it's words fail when you get to that. I think it's just the only thing that's inside of me is just I am. That's the only thing that I can add to that.
Yeah.
That
so as long as you found that, then you're going to be fine. The rest of it is just you just got to give it time to grow. And I think I've heard so much just amazing self-awareness from you that I think you've got this stuff on lock. Like, it's going to be fun. I'm excited to watch your journey.
Thank you.
So I know we've been talking for a little over an hour. We've got about half an hour to 45 minutes left. So I was wondering what you would prefer. I can ask you more questions. We can talk a little bit about men, mental health, relationships. If you've got questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
But I would love to
maybe doing a follow-up in some way, maybe on your end or something, but whatever you want to do.
Good point. I was gonna say, but I'll save that perhaps to my end because I wanted to ask you about Ayurveda and to learn from you about. Well, maybe you could just give me a little bit of how you use that in your interactions or practice. And here I go again with how do you use this?
No, that's fine, right? So just noticing it is good. I mean, you gotta use it, right?
Yeah,
that's okay.
I'm curious.
Yeah, so let's just do a little bit of background about Ayurveda. So Ayurveda is traditional Indian medicine. There's a lot of cross-pollination between traditional Chinese medicine and traditional Indian medicine. I mean, this may be a statement that upsets a lot of people, but I think they're very equivalent in a lot of ways. Just the way that they view the body and the human being is very similar and is very different from the way that we view it in the West. So in the West, we tend to be very reductionist. So what we do is we take a human being and we split them up into their parts, and then we kind of dive down and then we split a part into more parts and a part into more parts. We sort of have a molecule, we have an atom, we have, protons and neutrons and electrons, and then we have quarks. Similarly, we have a human being, we have a brain, we have a heart, we have a stomach, we have gastroenterologists, cardiologists, neurologists, psychiatrists. So we split the body apart and we focus on a particular organ. So the first thing that's different about the Eastern systems of medicine is that they're about patterns of people as opposed to individual like organ functions. And so what they sort of used were kind of like heuristics or tools of understanding to describe people. So what they kind of noticed is that if you look at organ function or you look at any particular thing, that there are people who have shared traits across organ systems.
Yeah.
So for example, they noticed that some people get bored very easily. They work their hardest. So there are some people that if they're doing something new, they can work for 12 or 16 hours a day or even 20 hours a day. But if they're doing something old, it'll be a struggle to work for even 4 hours a day. And they also noticed other patterns. Like these people, for example, will be prone to constipation, that they will be prone to things like asthma, eczema, things like that.
Cold hands and feet, right?
Cold hands and feet. Yep.
Yeah.
Right. So they also will have angular features. Other kinds of observations they made are that the top of their eyelid covers a chunk of the iris of the eye. And they made all kinds of interesting observations. And so then what they tried to do is try to figure out, okay, like what are we going to call this, right? Because there are features across eyes, skin, all the organs. And so they used elements. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that they ever really thought that if I biopsy someone, I will find wind. Yeah. But, Vata is sort of categorized by wind. And what they mean by that is that these people are kind of dynamic. Like, what are the qualities of the wind? So this is like stuff that they developed like 4,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So they didn't have
instrumentation. I feel a strong connection to wind. Very it's when I found out I was a Vata, I was like, all right, this is a little, yeah. And I have the cold hands, cold feet. It was surprisingly on the nose for me.
And so if you kind of think about people who are Vata, their mind is like the wind, so they get excited about things. The wind can blow really hard, it can stop blowing. It can change direction. And the wind sometimes is not quite as consistent. These people also tend to be dry. So like they'll have constipation and potentially dry skin and things like that. And so if you kind of look at it scientifically, like I was under the impression there was a lot of very good science behind Ayurveda, and looked at a couple of trials, and thankfully a couple of people in my community pointed out that some of the research papers I was talking about were not actually the best. So I kind of did a reevaluation of sort of the scientific basis behind Ayurveda. There isn't a whole lot of good scientific evidence that corroborates this. There are some gene allele studies that detect a statistical significance, but it tends to be quite small, that even Vatas will share particular alleles. So if you look at like the way that we metabolize cholesterol, for example, Vatas are more likely to have a particular allele at cholesterol metabolism, whereas Pittas will have something, Kaphas will have something. I think the more of the data that supports it, and there's really not much, there's some genetic support of some of these theories. Frankly, it's quite light. I think part of the problem that we run into with Ayurveda and science is that the system of Ayurveda is not designed to be studied by Western science.
Correct.
So if we look at Western science, what we try to do is we assume that a disease is an isolatable thing. So what we'll do is these things called randomized controlled trials. Well, we will control for all of the individuality, and then we will try to isolate a disease process in some kind of intervention. The interesting thing is that runs completely contrary to the principles of Ayurveda, which is that you can't control for all of these factors because people are individuals. One of the biggest differences, I think, between Western medicine and Eastern medicine is that Western medicine, is, generally speaking, assumes that all people are the same. Now, a lot of Western doctors will take issue with that. But if you really think about, I think the more you understand it, the more you realize it's true. So if you look at these things like FDA's recommendation of 2,000 calories a day, just the fact that we have a recommendation of a uniform number of calories for all human beings speaks to our sort of population-based approach. Yeah. If something works in Western medicine, how do we decide if it works? We measure 10,000 people, and if on average it helps people more than placebo, then we say it works.
Yeah.
Part of what you discover in clinical medicine, so if we're talking about like antidepressants and stuff, is that really what I've seen is that there are three populations of patients with a mood disorder like major depressive disorder. A third of them, antidepressants work really, really well. A third of them, you get maybe some benefit. And a third of them, they really don't work at all. And so what we see in Western medicine is we assume that all major depressive disorder or all bipolar disorder is basically the same. And we have evidence-based treatments. But in Ayurveda, the fundamental thing that they assume is that people are different. So each person has a unique cognitive fingerprint, or maybe not unique, but there are patterns that we can observe. And we sort of see this because we know that some people are like what we call big boned, right? Where they're going to be, their metabolism is going to be heavy set. And there's also a concept from Western medicine like endomorphs, ectomorphs, and mesomorphs. Maps on the Vata, Pitta, and Kapha really, really well. So these are kind of independently discovered in the West as well. And so what Ayurveda basically says is if we look at people who have high metabolisms, they can eat as much as they want to and they won't get very fat. At the other end, you have these slow metabolism kind of people that are going to be big boned or whatever. So we know that metabolically, there are like three groups of people. What Ayurveda basically says is that it's just not metabolically. You can look at the mind and there are three groups of people. You can look at digestive system, skin, all of the organ systems have manifestations of these particular things. Now, in your case, is that just sort of like a kind of a scientific disclaimer about, what do we know, what do we not know? Yeah. I think there's also some really interesting scientific stuff around. So, for example, if you look at like blockbuster drugs like statins, which are like cholesterol medication that everyone takes, these are actually a medicine that was developed by traditional Chinese medicine, so it was used by Chinese doctors. The other thing that we tend to see from a science standpoint is that when something in the East works, it gets co-opted to the West, and we don't really give it credit.
Yeah.
And then what we sort of say is, oh yeah, like Chinese medicine is fake and like Western medicine works, but it's like, hold on a second, who actually discovered this?
Yeah.
Now going on to, so any questions about that? Just kind of backdrop maybe for.
No, that's good. I appreciate the the description that you had about reductionist, Westernist ways, again, an older version of me would go, ha, proof positive, this is nonsense. And I see what you're saying about this is not designed to be measured by a reductionist approach that is looking for alleles even. It's supposed to be treated holistically. And the question is, does this work when broadly, like when applied to a person?
So I think just from a scientific nerdiness standpoint, I think if we want to see Ayurveda, studies for Ayurveda need to be something called cohort studies as opposed to RCTs. So what we need to do is we need to take 100 people, give them Ayurvedic treatment, and we need to take 100 people, give them Western medical treatment. And we need to see when an Ayurvedic person diagnoses each person individually and applies whatever recommendations they have, does that population, how do their outcomes compare to the Western medicine doctor? And I think if we design studies that way, we'll see more value.
Yeah, and perhaps even just a placebo statement where they're given nothing, because I'm sure there are places where even if Western medicine won on average, it does seem to me, you talked about that third for whom depressants don't work. There are these people that when they are treated not with the Western interventionist take this pill approach, flourish. Now, is that a large number or a smaller number? I don't know, but there seems to be an important niche that should exist for people to have these holistic treatments.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're moving in that direction. So, you know, before doing this whole YouTube and Twitch thing, my area of expertise was actually in evidence-based complementary and alternative medicine. So really understanding, okay, how do we apply this stuff? And I started a clinic actually at Mass General Hospital where I was using some of these principles, you know, and with appropriate oversight and stuff. And we saw really good outcomes and patients really loved it. So we filled up pretty quick. Kind of going on to you, I imagine you're asking because of the Vata Pitta thing.
Yeah, I mean, it started, the psychedelics were way out of my, that was not something I ever would have considered, except that I was extremely sad after a breakup. I've seen, when handled appropriately, tremendous positive impact from those things, which made me go, what have I written off because it seemed too out there? And then a friend said the word Ayurveda the other day. He told me I was a Vata Pitta. I looked it up, and that plus what you just shared is sort of the extent of my understanding.
Yeah, so in terms of Vata Pitta, I'm curious whether you're Vata Pitta or Pitta Vata, but that's because you can have a primary and a secondary. So just to, you know, share with you what my understanding, and I'm not a trained Ayurvedic physician, by the way, so this is amateur hour, okay? So Vatas tend to be like the wind and Pittas tend to be like fire. So if you think about what are the qualities of fire, it tends to be, it burns, right? So it's like kind of consistent, but it doesn't burn forever. So once it runs out of fuel, it'll kind of extinguish. Kind of the more you feed it, the more it'll burn. So Pittas tend to be driven, focused, quite like sequential, like I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. Even your personal journey is like very Pitta oriented. It's like, I had my shy phase and then I graduated to this and I graduated to this and I graduated to this. Whereas a more of a Vata journey is going to be like, then I did this random thing and I did this random thing. Yours has a lot of linearity to it. So Pittas will be quite linear. And then Vatas will be kind of all over the place. So you really do have a Vata Pitta kind of thing, which is, and what I see when I work with people professionally is you're going to have a project that you're going to sink everything into for some amount of time, and then you're going to get bored of it and you need to do something new.
Yeah.
So as a Vata Pitta myself, I studied to become a monk for 7 years. Then I went to med school and did that for a while. Now I guess I'm doing this. Starting to get bored of this a little bit. We'll see what happens. And so what we sort of see is like a nice amount of variety. And I think a big part of understanding your dosha is that you can kind of craft your life to be optimal for your cognitive fingerprint. So one thing you've got to be careful of is that you can get scattered too easily. Another thing that you've got to be careful of is that, you know, there are obsessional qualities with Pitta. And so Vata Pittas sometimes have what I would call as like rotating obsessions. Right. So you're not obsessive about one thing. You're not going to be like doing violin for 40 years, but you're going to get really far into something and then you'll kind of move on to something else. And just to understand, you know, not to let, so sometimes you have to be a little bit restrictive in terms of, you know, is this really time to move on? Am I sitting in this too long? Also, Pittas like need to kind of learn how to let go some. And especially when it comes to things like relationships and stuff, Pittas will be quite tenacious, for lack of a better term. Vatas can be quite flighty. Gaffas tend to stay in relationships for far too long. But on the upside, will also stay in a relationship and work through their problems. So these are all more like observational kind of things. There's like, old Indian literature about this, but we don't really have good scientific studies. But I think observationally, it can be quite strong.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, the things that connected with me, and again, these are coming from my own personal reflections, is that I've had, there's many things, but cold hands and feet is something that I've had for a long time. And again, this was in sort of a medicine journey, but, the codependency thing and how that sort of connected and why the Vata thing came. I had a journey, one where wind came up super strong for me, but also the sensation of losing connection with my heart and feeling like that was one of the first things that I looked to give away. Like take this, and in the sense of when to be liked, I lose connection with self. And several journeys, therapy, all that stuff, as I feel connection with my heart and literally feel my heart beat, which sometimes, no matter how hard I tried, I could not locate it without like pressing on it. As I do that, I literally feel my hands warm up. I feel my feet warm up. And so some of the things that it pointed to out of balance, just in the little quiz that I took, I found to be, this is what it can look like out of balance. What if I paid attention to some of these particular things that were highlights as a potential problematic symptom when this is out of balance, and addressed that? And that has been just an interesting thing to pay attention to for the last few days.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was thinking about Vata when you were describing. So when I asked you this question earlier about how do you know what's like core personality and how do you know what's performative, you basically described grounding. So when your energy gets too high and you have too many thoughts, that's a Vata perturbation. And then the more that you can literally like get closer to the earth, and it's interesting because the body part that you started with was your buttocks and the gluteal region, right? So to be seated, to be grounded somewhere, and kind of like the more you're in your own head, the further away from yourself you become, the more grounded you are in your body, which I think is really interesting because I have a lot of thoughts. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase normative male alexithymia.
I've not.
So this is the other thing that kind of I realized. It's really interesting to hear how physical your emotional journey has been, which is oftentimes what men really need to do. And there's this concept called alexithymia, which is color blindness of your internal emotional state. So a lot of men like literally don't know what emotions they're feeling.
What they're feeling, yeah.
Yeah. So we're familiar with frustration, and everything pisses us off. Like if I'm ashamed of myself, I'm pissed off. If I feel rejected by someone, unloved, I'm going to be pissed at them. I'll be pissed at myself. I'm not depressed. I'm going to be pissed at myself.
Yep.
If I'm anxious about something, I'm going to lash out at that person and try to be like controlling towards them and try to control my own life. And so one of the really interesting things is that there's a term normative male alexithymia. And what some psychologists have discovered is that it's normal for men to not understand their internal emotional state.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of men, what we do understand is like the feelings in our body. So the window to understanding your emotions as a man is oftentimes actually using your body.
Yes.
So understanding what am I feeling physically right now? And then you can ask people like, okay, if you've got a lump in your throat, like what emotion do you think that could be? And then they're like, I don't know, maybe fear. And that's like that. Or you're feeling afraid? And they're like, wow, yeah, I'm feeling afraid. Like I feel like that's fear. Oh crap, I never knew that. So it makes a lot of sense. I mean, just everything that I'm hearing from you is making me, it's really lovely to hear kind of your journey and using your body to understand your emotions and how your EQ has essentially been boosted.
Yes. No, I what you just said, 100%. I mean, first off, I discovered the ground probably 6 months ago. It was a revelation. Like it was life-changing to go, holy cow. But for me, it's the support of the ground, which I just didn't notice. What a blessing and gift it is to feel the ground. And I'd lost it for a long time. The other thing, I can't say it back to you, but the male inner color blindness, totally relate to that. Again, shame is something that I didn't know that I had any shame probably up until 6 months to a year ago. What I knew that I had was anger. And I would feel my fist And I had come to, oh, this isn't always anger. Sometimes this is trying to crawl out of my own skin because I feel so uncomfortable with myself. And in, yes, like the higher gradation of understanding of these experiences implies a radically different approach to them. The way that one handles anger and the way that one handles shame, for me at least, I'll say, that was such a difficult learning, but again, another blessing gift to go, oh my God, this is shame. That's what this is. And that's why when somebody talks about it, I feel angry at them. No, I'm ashamed. I'm not angry at you for bringing this up necessarily, though that can be activated. I'm feeling shame and I want tenderness versus, I would feel shame, get angry, get away from me was the reaction so often. So it's been, the body has been that place where I have found the ability to separate out what is actually occurring inside of me.
Yeah. Cool, man.
Yeah. Love the ground. My guy.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know if I'd quite call this a meditation technique, but I was working in a psychiatric hospital, and one day people were ungrounded. So I did something that maybe could have gotten me fired. Who knows? I think it was probably safe. But so what I asked all my patients, we all went outside. So there was a group of about 10 of us. And what I asked the patients to do is just spin in a circle. We're going to spin around like a kid until you feel dizzy. And the second you feel dizzy, lay down on the ground. So hyperactivate your vestibular system. And then, like, if you want to feel the ground and you want to know what it is to be grounded, this is such a beautiful technique. Because then you're going to feel the whole world spinning around you. But there's one place of solidity, and you'll feel it on your back. It's such an amazing sensation.
Wow.
And I think we sort of know in psychiatry that for people who are not in a good mental headspace, we tend to use grounding meditations, basically. When we teach mindfulness on the inpatient unit, it's almost always a grounding kind of meditation. Yeah.
That's super cool. I like that. I think the way I found the ground was not dissimilar, which is I had to, through, for me it was psychedelics, but I don't think it has to be for anyone. The structure that I had built in myself had to get broken down so that I could hit the ground, so I could relax into the ground. And same thing that you're describing with the dizziness is I'm gonna mess up your vestibular system for a moment so that you can feel what is solid even when you're spinning and feeling and falling apart. Super cool.
What a beautiful way to put it. So that you can feel, when everything is spinning, you can feel.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So how are you feeling about the conversation? Is there something in particular you want to talk about? Is that enough about Ayurveda?
Oh, I will definitely ask you more if you love to have you on our cast. But no, that's a really good understanding for me, and I'm happy to go. I've got time. We can go in any direction or whatever. If it's time to wrap up, I'm also cool with that.
So I'm a little bit curious, like, do you have thoughts about what's going on with men nowadays?
Yeah, let's do it.
Thoughts about male mental health?
When you described men, I think you're dead on. Like, what is normal for men is to not know their inner world. I feel like it's what the word that I've recently learned and appreciated is subclinical, which is to say we have a culture that has made normal illness. So I'm not sure that what is happening with men today is necessary to occur inside of men, but I think in our culture it seems to. I'll speak to my cohort, which I think is a little bit different perhaps than people that you might often speak to. There's and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I know that you talk a lot about dopamine and getting addicted to screens and the inability to sit with boredom because your brain is telling like, get me some more of that stuff, and how many ways there are for that outlet. What I've seen in my cohort of men is men that, shunned that, found a way to cut that off, optimize that, and then leaned heavy into performance, which is perhaps just another dopamine trap. But what I see in them, which is really beautiful now that it's shifting, is that they're disconnected from femininity. And my cohort, the way that we dealt with that is by going heavy into relationships. And that was like the one bastion in our lives where I and my friends were able to relax and not produce, not work, sit back and watch a movie because it's a date night and that's acceptable on a date night. And what has shifted amongst my friends is that I feel like perhaps it's aspect of mature masculinity, perhaps it's a more feminine aspect in ourselves, but we have been able to provide one another as friends with space, listening to one another's problems without jumping in with advice, judgment, or shame in order, like, that's not how we do it here. Time to like turn it around and change it. And what I have seen from my friends and myself is that we're sort of a cohort of kids that had super enmeshed mothers. Like, that's all of my friends. And as because of that, we take massive levels of responsibility. We feel everything in both the, in a way that is beneficial and detrimental is our fault. So we're constantly taking responsibility, and we can overstep. We can allow that to make relationships toxic, because the question is, what did I do wrong? She said I did something wrong. I need to adjust. I'm not doing enough. And as we are more there for one another, some relationships are ending with girlfriends. Some relationships are transforming, and there's more sincere and open expressed love, which I would say I think that's a broad thing probably across our society, that men have had to settle for respect as the highest thing to aspire to, and do not have a lot of experiences of love, of like, you don't have to earn it. You just, you are, and that's enough for you to be, sort of what you pointed me towards. That's my broad sense from my little corner of people that I interact with.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear. I think, can I just process what you said for a second?
Please.
I wonder. Yeah, let me just. Can I think for a second?
Yeah.
Calculating.
Take your time.
How common do you think it is for people to be enmeshed with their moms?
Okay, so my sample size is totally messed up because I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, so that's what I'm kind of wondering. Is I'm wondering actually, like, maybe the mistake we're making is that we're assuming that your sample size is very specific to you.
Oh, well, perhaps and okay, I'll be so bold as to make a generational claim that I've seen for me, and if this reflects the people you've talked to. My grandpa was an orphan who fought in World War II. I mean, that guy, God bless him, had a hard, material, physical existence. He had 10 kids that he provided for materially, and I don't think was an emotional presence for either his wife or his kids. His daughter, my mom, and my dad of the same generation, what they provided for their children was, in my suburban town, which I felt was very common, was you're going to be well taken care of materially, and we're involved emotionally. We're like very much there. When I see my mom, though, the thing that was being processed, I feel like for her, even as she had kids, was this: I never felt like I had that emotional, deep connection that I wanted with my family. Let's do it now. We're going to be tight. And
Pendulum swung the other way.
Yes. And so my generation and the people that I see around me, they describe their mother. I had the best mom in the world. She was always there. It's a lot of those things. And I think what took me a while to acknowledge was not the wrongness of it. First, I acknowledged the wrongness because I was angry, but the pain that was the enmeshed unit that we became from a very, very young age, and did not fully individuate. And the way that I handled that was, I mean, I told you, I left the country. I went abroad. Like, I tried to get far away from that, but couldn't. That was like, my system was so comfortable with that sort of a setup. And the gift of having had both the physical support and a lot of emotional love as well, which came with some enmeshment things, is that I feel the opportunity in my generation to make a different mistake when I have kids, and I don't know what that mistake will be, but I feel that before I have kids, that I have the opportunity to do a lot of healing and a lot of okayness with myself, such that my kid is offered the opportunity, at least for me, to just be. To be who you are. You do not have to tend to my emotional needs. I chose to have you. My job is to provide the love. This is an asymmetrical relationship, and I'm totally down for that. And of course, there will be things that I receive and get from that relationship, but I think it's more in the vein of the joy of watching you be you is the gift that I'll get. And of course, I'll make mistakes and do things wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's, and I don't know if that generational lineup is what you see when you talk to people, but that's certainly big in my group.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's so interesting is because I also think about being enmeshed with a mom is a not normal thing. But the more that I'm sort of hearing you talk about it, and just the subjective way that you describe it, I think is actually sounds quite common to me.
Yeah.
And especially as you're bringing in these generational aspects, right? So we had like the generation of World War II veterans who were emotionally unavailable, focused on material things, provided for their families, right? Because that's what the major responsibility. And then the generation above us were new to these emotion things. And so maybe they got too emotionally involved. And it's really interesting because I'm not hearing anywhere that you had a bad mom, you know?
No, she was, this is what people, thank you so much for reminding me and saying that, but people can sometimes think when I say this, that I had she was wonderful.
Yeah.
And yes, and there was pain and there was this thing. Yeah.
And it's you know, I certainly, and that's why I sort of mentioned it explicitly, because I'm not, you know, I'm hearing that you had a very loving mother who provided for you and took care of you and things like that. But as you're kind of saying, I think that I wonder if there is something, you know, because something's going on with men.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what it is. I certainly see responsibility as a big part of it. Like I've had patients who are making 7 figures and are suicidal. This is another really interesting statistic. Potentially up to 60% of men who kill themselves may not actually have any mental illness. There's some really fascinating studies on that where we're not quite sure. But I think one of the trickiest things we understand we're starting to understand, and I'm really appreciating as a clinician, is that suicidality doesn't necessarily equate to mental illness. And yet, especially with the men that I work with, a lot of them, it's not like their mind is malfunctioning. So when we think about mental illness, we think about pathology. This is not the way that it's supposed to function. And for a really long time, I think we just assumed, and we sort of still do, we sort of take suicidality as a mark for, and I definitely think it warrants like a clinical evaluation, because if there is an illness that can be medically treated, like we don't want to miss that by any means. But the really disturbing thing is that some of the people that I've worked with, I wouldn't really, they don't fit the standard profile of something like a mood disorder.
Yeah.
Instead, what I see is a lot of overwhelming responsibility, an attempt to live up to that responsibility, and inevitable failure because the responsibility is inappropriate. And it in many ways, it's similar to what you're describing, but go ahead.
No, I'm not as familiar with the broad patterns, but when you do say that matches very much my subjective experience, which is, I think it's possible that there is a generation, and certainly in my neighborhood, there was, of mothers that wanted to heal through having children. When I hear, that wanted, that was their connection point with the world, was to have that child as opposed to having a connection point with themselves. And then I'll speak only, to my own limited family. There's also the element that I haven't mentioned of the inability to acknowledge, like there's a shame in acknowledging daddy issues if you're a man, or mommy issues if you're a man, because those terms in themselves can feel derogatory, demeaning, or childlike. But my relationship with my dad had a massive impact on who I became. The wonderful things and the negative things, not the negative things, the things. And one element of that was feeling as if I contributed to, like when I saw him working to provide for his family, that I had made his life worse. When I saw his frustrations and holding that he'd be better off without me. And people had different levels of emotional fluency with their dads. For me, mom was the, I love you, the hugs and all of that. My dad was catch in sports and he was present, but the tenderness, like there was not that that level of tenderness had to dip by age 3, 4, 5, I don't know when, where we couldn't do the hugs anymore, and we couldn't do the sincere depth of I love yous. Like that was inappropriate. And as I look back, it was like recently I've gotten some of them. I've through some of the work we've done together, like the hugs that he has given me have transformed my life. And I cannot exaggerate I could have done it without it, and it would have taken me a while, but oh my God, receiving some of that and going, he loves me. I have been a gift to him. What a like earth shattering for me to let that in. And I know that everybody has their own different family configuration, of which that may or may not be true for them. But I don't want to reduce everything to the mother wound and the father wound, but that has been a real access point for me to become more soulful, more whole, and to not fall into the categories that you are describing that men are falling into of, self-harm and all those sorts of things.
It's so interesting because so many of the things that you're saying can lead to some of the people that I've worked with. When you kind of say that, to realize that I'm a burden, like that's the first step on a path that can end in a very dark place.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I'm sort of appreciating is just how touch starved. So society as a whole, this is not exclusively men by any means. I think we're becoming a society where women are also increasingly touch starved.
Yeah.
But men, I think I know so many men who, like you said, like it's kind of weird, but I almost sort of chalk this up to the general homophobia of the 80s and 90s, right? Where I also grew up in a place where gay was a derogatory term. Like I grew up in East Texas, and to be gay was the biggest insult that you could possibly have. And there was just a complete lack of acceptance. And the other really interesting thing that I kind of noticed when I think about my own life is that it was because of that homophobia that my friends and I were not allowed to touch each other.
Yeah.
Right. Like we couldn't hug or we couldn't do any of that stuff. And if you kind of look at, the way we're wired, I mean, we're wired to touch. If you look at like Aboriginal societies and stuff like that. I remember I was in India and this was my first summer in India, and there was one of my friends or mentors was getting married. So I was like 21 at the time. He was like 28 or something. Mm-hmm. And he had two of his friends like come up to him and they like flanked him on each arm. So he had one arm around each of their shoulders. Wow. And they were like both rubbing his belly. And they were like cooing at him. I don't know what else to call it. And my East Texas mind was like, what is this? Yeah. And they were like joking with him about, you're going to get married now. And they were talking about how he's going to like eat well or something like that. And just that level of touch was just completely foreign. Yeah. And like, friends in India, like men will hold hands when they like walk, which is a little bit unusual, right? So like, or at least to me it was.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a big lack of, you're talking about the healing power of just like hugging your dad. And and like, I wonder if that's a huge part of it. Like just.
I think it is. And also like the level of disconnection for me from my body that would have let me know, hey, this is something I want. Like I couldn't even feel the lack of that. We only are aware of these problems because 7 steps down the line, somebody does something dramatic, hurts themselves. But there's also, I mean, even the men that you're describing don't have mental illness. There's an entire, I know them, of successful, high-producing leaders that are trying to medicate the internal world with external success. And they're not addicted to drugs in the traditional sense, but they are addicted to that cycle that for me cannot be tended to in that way. At least that's what I have come to learn. And I think it's probably true for them as well. But yeah, there's the other ways in we're not even aware of.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And I think the unfortunate thing that I've found, and there's some Eastern teachings to support this, is that I think you have to kind of go through that to recognize its insufficiency. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes when I work with people in general, I mean, we're talking about men right in a second, but I think it applies to women as well, where, you can't know that something is not going to make you happy until you actually have it. Mm-hmm. And there's a really interesting kind of conundrum in the East, is if you look at all the people who attained enlightenment. I'm not sure if you're kind of familiar with this concept of, like, Buddha became enlightened.
Yeah.
So if you look at all the people who basically are like the religious figures, and if we kind of look at it from a historical perspective, these people were probably enlightened. And the really interesting thing is in India, you have 4 castes, and the highest caste were the Brahmins, or the priest caste. And they were the closest to God. They were the teachers of meditation. But there are no enlightened Brahmins. All of the enlightened people were actually from the noble caste. So Buddha was a king or prince. Like the Ram and Krishna, which are considered avatars of Vishnu, are also kings or princes. And so it's really interesting, because you would think that shouldn't the priests be the ones that are enlightened, because they're the ones that are teaching meditation. And there's a really simple kind of take on this, which is that you can't really move towards spirituality until you've realized that material pursuits are unsatisfying.
Yeah.
And so just talking about, the journey that you're on, like, it's like, I don't mean to demean your experience, but it's lovely to see how you're on this journey. And it's kind of textbook of like material success, and then kind of like finding yourself, and then like, and once again, I really don't mean to demean it, because I honestly think it's
not
beautiful,
at all.
but
Jim Carrey has that commencement or acceptance speech. He's talking to, I think, college grads, where he says, I hope you get everything that you dream of, so that you can realize that that's not the answer. And I am so grateful to have been able to get those markers early in my life. And so grateful to have done that. And I wish people the success that they imagine, as long as they're not hurting other people, partially for that reason. It's like, I hope you get it. And then you go, oh, is this it? Did this do the thing that I thought it would do? But you had said something about men. One thing that I just wanted to mention, somebody brought this up to me, and I thought that it was poignant, was that with the exception of perhaps handshakes and the occasional bro hug, a lot of the touches that men receive from other men are violent. And meaning, like, if you're touched, you might, perhaps it's spanked, or it's a knock on your arm, or God forbid, you're molested or something like that. And I have felt, and this is something I had to unlock, that there was a protectiveness in me not extending myself towards other men. I don't want to let that, like, again, a not knowing who I was, confused. Maybe I'm that person. And at times I think I could have let that out with rage. And, so that there's an other protectedness, which is, I'm not going to do that to you. Let me stay in my own private island of not touching, and not acknowledge that this is something that I wish that I had in a safer way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that mirrors a lot of my own experience. When I started dating, early on, my girlfriend described what I had as a bubble. And she was like, anytime I get inside the bubble, like, you recoil. And she was very intentional about like bursting my bubble. It made me really uncomfortable at the time. I mean, I'm glad that she did it now, but it's so interesting to think about. I had not quite thought about it that way, but even in my own life, how like touch was like alien to me, like physical touch, until I started dating, and then it became more normal.
Yeah, for me, I mean, part of it, and I'm working through it still, to recognize, again, because I have the tendency to beat myself up for the ways in which I fall short of a perfect, loving person. But to recognize, for me, the confused love that came from, I'm not going to touch you. I am not going to hug you. I'm not going to place my hand on you, because some part of me fears harm coming through me to you, even though it's not rationally connected. There's an emotional hook in me, especially with the people that I'm closest to. It's like, I can hug strangers, but the people that I'm closest to need to be taken. They need to be more protected than a stranger does.
I love this phrase, confused love, because I can only imagine, how does like an 8-year-old or 10-year-old like understand that instinctively there should be some kind of physical contact in a moment like this, but that I'm not getting that.
Yeah.
And even on a subtle level, I wonder how at a minimum confusing it is, and at the top end traumatic it is.
Yeah.
And even just hearing your own story, we did a stream on trauma where, you know, one of the biggest things that I've learned about trauma is, in my opinion, it's like the great chameleon. So it looks like all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And it manifests in so many different ways. It can look like ADHD. It can look like depression, like chronic depression. It can look like even an endless pursuit for success. You know, it can look like so many different things. And so just, you know, hearing your story is, anyway, go ahead.
Oh, you just said endless chameleon. I'm like, yeah, that's resonates. Gosh, it's also for me has been, I think of it, you know, there's all these, it's got tendrils, and it's like, oh, this one thing affects, it affects if I hug my brother or not. It affects the relationship. I mean, we don't need to, I know we're late in the stream. I don't need to get into the particulars at this point, but it has had wide-ranging, the various traumas of my life have had wide-ranging effects in places that I would never guess. And I'm just very glad to have, well, maybe that's not the right word. It's just nice to reconstitute myself is what I'm saying. It's just, it's really nice.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Because I think, you know, you mentioned earlier that it kind of affects your sense of self, which is really what trauma does.
Yeah.
And thereby it manifests, because then what happens is we carry it with us, and it touches all these other parts of your life. And even some of that hunger to be good, right? You can't have that hunger of being good unless you feel like you're not good.
Yeah.
And one of the simplest ways, and there's a lot of really fascinating science and even like theory of mind. So if we look at young children, they don't have well-developed theory of mind. So what that sort of means is that they don't understand that there are other conscious beings that can affect things. And so if I don't have an understanding, a cognitive development that other minds exist out there, if I get hurt, it's my fault. And that's actually like evolutionary. So if you're a 1-year-old child who's learning how to walk and you feel pain, you have to accept responsibility. Otherwise, you'll never learn how to walk. Because if you blame someone else every time you fall over, like, you're never going to learn how to walk. And so we have some of this evolutionary circuitry, but the downside of that, the price we pay, is that if something traumatic happens to us, it's my fault. And that's where, you know, the subjective experience of that is shame, but it's more deeply wired than that.
Yeah. And that, for me, the illusion of control, I mean, what you're describing is, you know, the protective illusion of control that we can adopt at times in order to cope with difficult experiences is just, you know, gotten blown out of proportion, certainly in my life. And go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that illusion of control, just like you were kind of saying, like everything you're describing, I think sort of, I'm not trying to diagnose you or anything, but it's like consistent with what I've seen. And I think these are not even, you mentioned subclinical earlier, these are not necessarily even diagnosable things. This is just how human beings are. Where, you know, if you were in a situation where you were made to feel bad and someone else took power over you, and, you know, if what you feel is dependent on other people, I think you connected these dots yourself. Then if I can control the other person, I can control the way that I feel. Yeah. And so the way to control my feelings, which, first of all, by the way, you can't accept them, right? You got to control them. You got to make them go away. You got to have the good ones. You got to have the pride. You got to have the appreciation. You got to have the, you know, and you can't have the bad ones, is by controlling other people's behavior. And so we see that too, that control freaks can sometimes, that can be a trauma response.
Yeah. And for me, it was, while not acknowledging that this was me self-medicating through other people, it was all, no, I'm just so worried about them. I'm so, you know, I just need them. And, well, what do you need them to be better for them? and not recognizing, oh, for them, for me was a huge piece as well.
Yeah, I've never. So, Charlie, seriously, I'm loving so much of the way that you use language. Self-medicating with other people is a phrase that I've never heard before. I don't know if is that used elsewhere? Or?
I don't know.
Dude, if you made it's fucking brilliant, bro. Like,
thank you. I had not read it. I'll take credit on the stream, but then I'll give it a Google and be like, probably I may have read it.
I mean, I'm
elsewhere.
sure someone else has said it somewhere, but just the way that you articulate stuff, I think, really captures things.
Oh, thank you.
I can see why your YouTube channel is so friggin' successful, because with the way that you use words is really amazing, dude. Really, I think you've got a gift with words.
It
translating human experience.
Thank you. It has been a real, that was a huge, and I know we're winding down. The gift of Charisma on Command was to take something that felt there's something deep in there, which is I want to share my experience and be understood. And that has taught me to use language in a way such that I get a response or resonance. And it's really not I've had to learn it's not the only way, but it is a powerful way to be with someone, to be understood, to be connected. And though not the only way, I have learned the value of sitting in silence with someone, and I have learned things about myself and other people that I would have never been able to communicate or feel in any other way. So it's blessings and curses often are the same exact thing.
Yeah, I think you've stumbled upon a principle called Advaita Vedanta, which is non-dualism, which is that there's no such thing as a blessing or a curse, that everything is just, what it is.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to ask you on when we have a conversation for me, but I'm so curious about your 7 years as a monk. We can table that for now, but I'm so interested.
No, I think the sentiment that you just shared is actually a great place to wrap up, just about, how life is a series of blessings and curses. So thank you very much for, coming on stream today. Do you want to just tell people, so where should we find you now? Should we head over to Charisma on Command, or you want to point us to a couple other things?
Still videos coming out. I'm not making them, but you can check out Charisma on Command if you'd liked it before. I hope you continue to. I have a podcast called Dropping In. We'll hopefully have you on sometime soon, and you just type in Dropping In podcast, and those are it's all YouTube is what I do these days.
Okay, awesome, man. And what about didn't you have one on, your D&D thing?
D&D. Thank you for not letting me forget. Yeah, it's called Improv and Dragons, and it's got 4 episodes that are out right now. Give it a look if you're not a D&D person. Give it 5 minutes, see if it's up your alley. I put a tremendous amount of heart and effort. I'm a novice in it, and I'm very excited to continue that storytelling. Hopefully, in 5+ years, you'll see all of the lessons that I'm learning at this first one, which I recognize is in some ways leaves something to be desired, but still has the heart in there, will be born out to a beautiful, like everything ties together story in 5 years. So if you want to check out the early days of that, it's at Improv and Dragons.
Wow, dude, that's awesome. So Improv and Dragons, Dropping In as your podcast, and Charisma on Command. And thank you so much for coming, Charlie.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I wish you all the best on your sharp left turn in your career. I think it's going to be great. And if I can leave you with one last thing, if it's okay, if I give you just a tiny bit of advice, is that acceptable? So one thing I would just strongly recommend is you don't need to be ready to have kids. I know it sounds weird. I hear this too much where, and this may not be true of everyone. Like if you're not ready to have kids, don't have kids. But there's some people who are like, I need to be perfect before I have kids, and you need to sort out all this emotional stuff so that you can appreciate your, like, honestly, my biggest learning from having children is that they teach you. You try to prepare so much, but they teach you so well. And you don't need to be ready they'll make you ready. That's what they do.
Yeah.
And so, I'd encourage you, if the time feels right, and if, you're with the right person or not with the right person, or whatever you decide to do with your life, but you're great, dude. Like, you're going to be a fantastic dad. Like I feel really strongly about that. So that's the one thing I would leave you with.
Thank you. I hear that.
You'll be fine. They'll be fine.
and I'll have times of not fine, and that will be okay as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Take care, man. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you so much. All right. Do I click off here? How do we do the stream thing?
I'm going to click a button, and then I'm going to hang up on you.
Okay. Sounds good. Wonderful chatting with you. Take
care. Okay. Well, that was fun, chat. So cool. Oh my God. Okay. So I was taking furious notes, and I feel inspired to make like a dozen YouTube videos out of this. So there's so many concepts that Charlie just has such good language, like his experience, his journey, like it's the whole package, chat. He is a mega Chad. He is a Sigma grind set alpha male, all of those things. And now he's getting in touch with his feminine side, which is the most alpha thing you can do. And, there's the pursuing success, like also kind of bizarre that there's like a history of trauma and like all this success, and it's like not enough. And there's a little bit of psychedelics thrown in. I feel like he is an encapsulation of all of the stages of our community, because we have everyone, right? And he's kind of like all of them. So I hope y'all enjoyed it. I hope y'all learned something. I'm truly just stunned. And it really makes me appreciate how much we can learn from people who are not experts. Right? So I think one of the biggest things that we're almost missing well, I guess we're not really missing it because of social media and whatnot. But what I think is so cool is just hearing him talk about his journey and like how trauma is like a part of it and has defined many things, but also like is a part of his journey and how he's grown out of it. I think, a couple of takeaways. So a couple of things to remember. One is that psychedelics, you have to be super careful, right? We don't recommend them for a reason. We hear success stories. The problem is that, how can I say this? The people who become successful YouTubers and have a lot of self-actualization and direction in life are the ones who had good experiences. The people who have bad experiences, you will never hear about. I mean, you'll hear about them potentially from our community because we talk to everybody. But, so you've got to be super careful about a selection bias there. But a couple of other things that I think he's just a walking advertisement for. I think one amount of like understanding your body, getting some therapy, having a strong support network. We saw some animals in the background. And I think like hugging your dad, right? Or like engaging in some sort of, meaningful physical contact with like other human beings. And I think so many concepts that I think are really interesting to think about, just about how men relate to their emotions. And by the way, this is not exclusively men anymore. So I suspect that in the next 20 years, we're going to see a lot of the problems that men face today. Women are going to be facing them too. It's already starting to happen. So loneliness, touch starvation, there's some ideas that women can find companionship or love like whenever they want to. It's not really true. I think we've seen that in our community, and huge amount of gratitude to all the women who have spoken up in our community and shared their experiences. It's not necessarily easy to be a woman in this world. It's not necessarily easy to be a man. And I think really about sort of understanding your emotions, the role of your emotions, not retreating from your emotions. There's just a lot of good stuff in there. Because especially what we see is that when you can't sit with your emotions, you end up out of control in your life. Because you don't control what you feel. You just control what you do when you feel something. And so if my whole life is lived in reaction to my emotions, other people get to control me. Because if they can evoke an emotion, they get to control my behavior. And this is what we feel like sometimes, right? So you get into these relationships, these toxic relationships, parents, significant others, friends, where they make you feel a particular way and they manipulate you. They're emotionally manipulative. But someone can only be emotionally manipulative if an emotion within you leads to a behavior. As long as that link is there, you can be emotionally manipulated. But the moment you are able to be with an emotion and not react to it is the moment that you will be free of all emotional manipulation. And this too, what do we do when people are emotionally manipulative? We try to control them. We try to control the circumstances, right? We try to put ourselves in situations where they can't manipulate us. But instead, we should be controlling this. So I'm trying to prevent this person from being emotionally manipulative. I'm not going to answer the phone because when mom or dad call, they're going to guilt trip me into going home. I don't want to go home. So I'm going to avoid them. Right? And even if you think about that, that's emotionally reactive. I'm afraid of them, so I'm going to not answer the phone. And then what do mom or dad do or whoever? They find some way to get to me. They call the cousins. They message me here. They show up on my doorstep. And then they make me feel guilty for not answering the phone. Don't you love us? And we've done everything for you. And so like you're responding to your emotions, responding to your emotions, responding to your emotions. You want freedom from all that? Learn to sit with your emotions. And people say that's hard. You're right. It is difficult. It is very difficult. It is doubly difficult because we specifically avoid and ignore training that skill when we're growing up. Stop crying. Or you are crying. Here, let me give you a toy. Let me make the crying stop. Let me use something from the outside, like an iPad or a phone or a screen nowadays. Let me use one of these devices to take your emotions away. Maybe you use a device to take your emotions away. Having a bad day? Let's binge watch something. And so you lose control over yourself. And if you don't control yourself, other people can control you. It's that simple. So if you want to get out of this, if you don't know where to start and you're like, my emotions are too much, start with your body. Start with the physical sensations of an emotion that you feel and just sit with those, right? So if you feel some kind of emotion, just sit down, close your eyes, lay down on the ground, go for a walk, and pay attention to what you're feeling. Describe as many things that you can that you're feeling. And as you notice each and every one of those things, you will notice that sometimes with increased awareness, there is an increased intensity. But this is where there's a really interesting principle of neuroscience. That rotating the awareness through your body reduces the impact of the negative sensation. So this is kind of weird. I'll explain this maybe in a little bit more detail. So there's studies done on people with chronic pain. Okay? You guys want like a mini lecture? Okay, so let's understand. The people don't understand how pain works, so we're going to talk about this. So in our brain, we have this thing called the somatosensory cortex. And in the somatosensory cortex, we have something called the homunculus. Do you guys know what this is? So I'm going to try to pull up. Oh, man. Okay, here we go. The cortical homunculus. Okay, y'all see this? So this thing is the cortical homunculus. So in the part of our brain where we feel sensations, we have a map of our brain. So if I touch someone, let's say over here, if I touch someone on their hip, let's say, this part of their brain lines up. And so what you'll kind of see is that some parts of the brain are big and some parts of the body are big and some are small. So if you look at the hand, why is the hand so big? It's because literally more of our brain is focused on the hand. So that's why we can touch things very finely here. Whereas if you look at things like the back, there's less of our brain is devoted to that. So the bigger the part on the homunculus is, the more sensitive we are to touch. So researchers were looking at chronic pain, okay? And we had this map of our body in our brain. That's where our somatosensory cortex is. That's how we feel touch. And so what they noticed, or a couple things. The first is that the homunculus is not fixed. That a particular part of more of our brain can be focused on one part of our body. And that the homunculus actually rotates around. So our whole somatosensory cortex can be locked into one area. So if, for example, I'm getting a massage and someone is rubbing my shoulders, the majority of my somatosensory cortex will be tuned into the shoulders. It's actually a lot more fluid than the homunculus would suggest. So that's actually an incorrect representation. There's fluidity in our somatosensory cortex. What does this mean for pain? So what we found in people who have chronic pain is that their homunculus is not fluid. There is a part of their brain that is locked in to a particular part of their body. That is the part of the body that has pain. And now, so what we thought was that since someone is hurting, more of their brain is focusing on the pain. But it's actually a two-way street. It's because the brain is locked into the area where the chronic pain exists that exacerbates the pain. If y'all want to understand this very simply, if you're getting an injection, if you're distracted by something, the injection will hurt less. If you are primed to the injection, like getting a blood draw or getting a shot, then it will hurt more. What we pay attention to is what hurts. So how do you fix chronic pain? Really fascinating. You rotate the awareness throughout the body. So as you focus on a different part, the pain actually goes down. And once you do rotating awareness of the body, like through a body scan in meditation, then what happens is it frees up the homunculus and it's no longer locked into the painful part. Fascinating. Okay, so this research, you guys can look up the lab. So there was someone named Dr. Kerr at Harvard Medical School who was a specialist in this kind of stuff. did somatosensory research. And she had a very young research assistant at the time. You may find a publication for Kerr and this research assistant. So this is what's interesting. When it comes to understanding your emotions, if you say my emotions are intolerable and focusing on that part of my body will only make the emotions worse. This is why we are going to use rotating awareness of the body. And if you notice one sensation and then notice the next and notice the next and notice the next, all of them will decrease and you will be able to tolerate the emotion. If you can tolerate the emotion and you can cause it to kind of melt away, then you will not react to it and you will not be controlled by it. Simple. Hard to do, takes practice, but simple. Tons of neuroscience to support it. Questions? Will this work if I get stabbed? What a fascinating question. The answer is probably to some extent, right? So we know that adept meditators can actually resist painful stimuli. There have been studies on. I wouldn't, I think if you got to do something, go for it. But, that's not an experiment that anybody should be running. Is it possible to sit for our emotions for too long? I'm going to go ahead and say no. So let me explain what I mean. Sitting with your emotions for too long is probably not going to happen. What oftentimes happens, the too long part comes from not sitting with our emotion, but engaging with our emotion. So when we engage with our emotion, we give it life, we give it strength, we give it energy. So if I'm feeling bad about myself and I got dumped by my ex and I'm feeling a particular way and then I go stalk my ex on social media, I'm engaging with the emotion. In each picture I see of my ex out there having fun, maybe dating other people, are they dating, are they not dating? I see pictures of her with someone else. That's engaging with our emotion. It's not sitting with it. And so if we engage it, it gets energy. And you all may have seen this where you can engage with your anxiety. You can try to fix your anxiety, right? You can feed it. Let me run through all the permutations. And so you go on working with it. You even try to conquer it. You try to suppress it. You try to push it away. And it comes roaring back the second you let down the walls. So if people sort of think, okay, can I sit too long with my emotions? No. You can engage with them. And the more you engage with them, the stronger they'll become. But sitting with them, generally speaking, decreases it. Now, some people may say, but I've sat with my emotions for a long time and it doesn't work. To which I would say, okay, first of all, I'm sure that there's a portion of the population that may be true for, but I'd say that even in my experience, I don't think you're sitting with it correctly. Which you've got to be careful about, right? Because there's a side note that we've got to be really careful about. If we say, hey, something doesn't work for you, you need to try harder. That's a very dangerous thing because, it's an infallible hypothesis. If you're not trying hard enough, then it could, it's kind of like when I talk to some people will, pick something like, let's say prayer. Nothing against prayer, by the way. But people will be like, yeah, the reason these problems are happening is because you're not praying hard enough. It's like, that's an unfalsifiable hypothesis. At the same time, I've worked with a ton of people who've been depressed for a very long time, and they've tried sitting with their depression. And usually what happens if they're sitting with their depression for a long time, it doesn't work, is that the depression is a cover for something else. So what they really need to be sitting with is underneath the depression. I've tried sitting with anger, but it never works. That's because you have to sit with what's fueling underneath. And in the case of depression, what is it? It's self-loathing, it's anger, it's hatred, it's shame. It's not sadness. Why are you so sad? Because my life is going nowhere. Because I got the short end of the stick. Well, what's the emotion underneath that? You're pissed at someone else for giving you the short end of the stick. Or you're pissed at yourself for being given an opportunity and not taking it. That's what leads to chronic depression. In terms of anger, I'm angry. What's underneath the anger? Shame. I'm ashamed of myself. I feel unloved. I'm afraid I'm unlovable. And so I'm going to get angry at the opposite gender, or maybe even my own gender if I'm gay. I will hate this class of people because I'm afraid that they won't accept me, or they've rejected me, and now I feel like I'm rejectable. And so if I lack that self-love, I'm going to blame someone else. So generally speaking, I think that sitting with an emotion works. Caveats, generally speaking, it works. So Glenton is saying, I can't feel the emotion that anger masks, though. That's also common. That's why sometimes it helps to have some help, right? So this is where like doing practices. So if you can't feel it, that's because oftentimes we're colorblind. We're alexithymic. And the cool thing is that we can like do things to increase our awareness of things. In the same way that you can train your palate to detect certain flavors, you can train your sense of touch, you can train your ears. So when we're practicing auscultation in medicine, like the first time I listened to someone's heart, I couldn't tell what I was hearing. You listen to 10 hearts, 100 hearts, 1,000 hearts, 10,000 hearts. I probably listened to somewhere around 5,000 or so, I would guess. Then you'll be able to detect a lot of differences. So if you can't detect your emotions, that's why we have some of these things like community events like Right in the Fields, certain kinds of meditations, things like that. Right? You can even journal or do other kinds of things. Okay. So the voice is going out. I want to thank all of y'all for coming today. Really appreciate, I know we're at a different time, and especially our EU gang, it's probably super late for y'all. But really loved having Charlie on, and really loved his perspective. So stay tuned to the stuff that we're doing during Mental Health May. We're doing all of these things to help y'all. And we're all about raising awareness, but we're also about doing more than raising awareness, because awareness don't cut it. So we have a lot of different stuff, hopefully things that are a little bit more applicable to y'all, that will help you in some concrete way. That's what we're really focused on. And the reason that we have these kinds of conversations is to raise awareness. But hopefully y'all learned something from this. You learn something, you take away something from our addiction stream, you take away something from our trauma stream, you understand that trauma is now a chameleon, and that maybe you're not screwed up and you're not a waste of space. Maybe there's a part of you that feels that way because you were taught that about yourself, because someone else made you feel that way. But that doesn't mean it's true for you. And so our hope is that by elevating not just awareness of mental health, but awareness of yourself, that we're able to help you. And as always, stay tuned to our Twitch, YouTube, whatever, Twitter. And even if y'all, if you guys haven't checked out things like Dr. K's Guide or coaching, feel free to check them out. That's where we have more comprehensive resources that are like, we answer all the questions. Because if y'all have bunches of questions about things like ADHD, motivation, meditation, depression, anxiety, understanding yourself, understanding your identity, that's all in Dr. K's Guide. Check out coaching if y'all are looking for one-on-one support or group support. We see a lot of benefits for people who, actually it's interesting because a lot of this Charisma on Command stuff is like stuff we kind of practice, not those specifics, but we practice a lot of emotional awareness, awareness of yourself, how to interact with other people, how to listen. That's part of those are the tools of group coaching. So then we tackle particular problems using those tools. But you have to learn emotional awareness, how to listen to yourself. Other people will be listening to you. They'll learn how to ask you questions so that you can gain understanding of yourself. That all happens in groups. So definitely check that out. And if y'all are not interested in that stuff or whatever, but you still appreciate what we do, please just share what we do with other people. So that helps us too. So, if you guys donate and stuff, that's cool. But if y'all can't afford that, totally fine as well. We've got healthy gamers in about 132 countries across the world at this point. So feel free to just share our resources with other people. That's why we build them. And that's why most of our stuff is available completely for free. And the last thing is, if y'all are looking for other kinds of events and things like that, if you guys are looking for more accountability and involvement, check out our Discord server. Cool. We'll see y'all, I think, on Wednesday, and then I think I'm going to be at American Psychiatric Association on Friday. Cool.